All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first Nature Connects Us webinar series of 2021. We are delighted to be here and to be here along with you. It's a sunny spring day here in Oklahoma City, and we're curious about where are you all located. So find the chat button down at the bottom of your screen there and type in, let us know, where are you from? Where are you from? We want to see. We have some very special guests with us here today for a fun, super fun topic. We're going to talk today about drones, and not just any drone. We're talking about bison drones. So as you can see behind me, there's some bison drone imagery right here. Looks like we've got folks from all over. We see Westminster, Colorado, Midwest City, Oklahoma. That's my hometown. Tulsa, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Edmond. All right, we've got some folks piling in here. T-Town. Hey, Bob White. Got Nick from Norman. Hey, Nick, one of our regulars. Good to see you, buddy. All kinds of folks. Great to see you all. Thanks for letting us know where you're at. Today, we are going to be visiting with Michael Werner and Joe Hanson from PBS about their work on one of PBS's newest series, which is called Overview. This series combines aerial cinematography with science storytelling. Say that 5 times fast. Science storytelling, science storytelling. That's a fun tongue twister. And it reveals both the natural phenomena and the human forces that are shaping our planet. Each of the episodes, or excuse me, one of the episodes that we have in this series is featuring the Oklahoma bison at the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. Last October, we had the pleasure of hosting Michael Werner and his wife, Katie, at our annual Bison Roundup for an opportunity to tell the story about how bison play an important role in conserving the Tallgrass Prairie ecosystem. I hope you were all able to watch that episode before joining us on this webinar. You are in for a super, super, super special treat today. Before I turn this over to Michael and Joe, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the Zoom interface. What you will find is a Q&A button. That's what I need for you all to locate right now. The Q&A button. Look down at the bottom of your screen. You should see it. If not, there might be a button with 3 dots. If you click the button with 3 dots, you'll have more options, and there should be a Q&A button in there if you don't see it right at the bottom of your screen. We will be using that for the Q&A session, which will occur in about 20 minutes after Michael and Joe's presentation. You will click that button and type in your questions for Michael and Joe. You can also like questions. So one way for us to know, sometimes there's duplicate questions, but if you don't want to type one in, you can also go in and just like them. So the ones with the most votes that rise to the top are the ones that we will seek out first. We have 1 hour to conduct this webinar and want to respect your time as well. So we will be wrapping up sharply at 1 o'clock or shortly before. Looks like we still got folks coming in here. Shelly from Morris County, Kansas. Welcome, Shelly. She's one of our very own with TNC. Good to see you, girl. And looks like we've also got some Nikita is from Whittier Elementary, 5th grade class in Muskogee has joined. Oh my goodness. Hello, Muskogee 5th grade class. Good to see you all. You guys are in for a really special treat. I can hardly wait. So let's get this party started. All right, let's meet our guests right quick. Hang on 1 second and I'm going to share a screen. All right, our first guest today is going to be Michael Werner. Michael is an award-winning independent filmmaker, photographer, and writer, and he's also just like an all-around super cool dude. His work has been featured in all kinds of media outlets, including PBS, HBO, and even the Cannes International Film Festival. He's also a former faculty member at the University of Oregon School of Journalism, and he holds a master's degree in narrative journalism. Very cool. Thank you for joining us, Michael. We've also got Joe Hanson. He is a science writer, biologist, host, video producer, and an educator. I'm not sure there's anything Joe doesn't do. He is an all-around dude, and he's also just a big personality. Hopefully you've seen him before on some of these PBS shows, such as It's Okay to Be Smart. He created that show. That was his invention. How cool is that? And he's also an award-winning science educator, which his show is an award-winning science program with PBS. He's also the creator and the co-host of Hot Mess, which is a PBS show about climate change and the environment. And he's also the host and co-writer of our topic of today, which is Overview, a PBS series that we'll be talking about featuring aerial photography. So that's the one we'll be focusing on. And also Joe received his PhD from the University of Texas in Austin, which is where he's joining us today. So without further ado, I'm turning this over. Oh, hang on, guys. Let's put Joe's picture up here. I forgot Joe. Welcome, Joe. All right. Without further ado, everyone, we're going to turn this show over to Michael and Joe. It's all yours.
Fantastic. Thank you all for having us, and apologies to everybody from Norman for that mention of University of Texas. We'll take care of it in the Q&A. Some of you may not be familiar with the show if you haven't seen the episodes or the one that we're going to be really digging into today. So we prepared a little short clip so you can see what Overview is all about before we kind of take you behind the scenes and tell you how we do what we do and why we do it. So we can get to that first clip and give you a little taste of what we were able to capture with our drones out in the Tallgrass Prairie.
You have to always be watching for the ones that are trying to cut and turn and blow past you.
You can have 300 of them going, and all of a sudden one cow tries to dart out, and then the rest of them try to follow, and so you never know. It looks like you're in control, but you're not.
At points, sometimes you and your vehicle are in the middle of just this swirl. Yeah, it's just chaos. Like a little bison bomb goes off. One of their really driving behaviors is this herd instinct. They want to be with other bison. They have this very synchronized movement, and so it's like you're moving a big organism. You have to.
That's fantastic. So you can obviously watch the entire episode, learn more about the ecological and species specific and ecosystem elements of this great science story that we try to tell on this episode of Overview and every story that we try to tell. It's an educational show at its core, but we're really trying to show the beauty of Earth and nature and the interconnected, zoomed out view of telling those science stories. And we're able to do that from the air. And if you'd like to watch that, you can find it on YouTube primarily. You go to PBS Terra, like the Earth, or you can find it on pbs.org, various PBS apps. And that's a little bit different than you might typically watch some PBS programming. And that I wanted to dig in for a few minutes and tell you guys a little bit more about PBS Digital Studios, the part of PBS that makes programs like this before we jump into the episode and overview that we'll be talking about today. So you can go to the next slide. The mission of PBS Digital Studios is just like PBS has been doing for ages, about developing incredible programming that inspires and educates and cultivates the next generation of amazing thinkers and people who care about their planet, but of course PBS viewers. We're looking for, we're trying to bridge that existing audience that's been loyal and supporting what public media is all about for generations, but also making sure that it continues to be relevant for new generations that aren't watching media in the same way that they used to. And we're doing that with entertaining shows, educational shows like this one, and everything in between. So you can go to the next slide. PBS Digital Studios began in 2012. It's kind of a little experiment inside of PBS. This little skunk works about, can we make things, if certain demographics are turning off television, if they're cutting the cord, if they're watching media in different places, how can we get the great educational and informative content and trustworthy content that public media is about to them? We know they're out there. So PBS Digital Studios began making short form content in 2012 and publishing that primarily on YouTube and digital platforms. And putting that out in different apps and things like that. And these aren't the hour-long specials on Nature and Nova and the wonderful programs that we're all used to growing up with. These are short form and very shareable. They fit in the ecosystems where we're publishing this on places like YouTube, and we're able to reach. I mean, you look at some of these stats with more than 20 shows in the network these days. We're reaching more than 27 million subscribers and far more people that aren't subscribed to the videos. Billions of views on the videos created over this network. Millions of views across a month. And I don't know if anybody ever pays attention to TV ratings, but we're having incredible reach and making public media relevant for a new generation. Because you can see that, 18 to 40, that people are going to be supporting this kind of work and the kind of work that the TNC does. For the next generation. Those are the people that we need to depend on, and we're really, really happy that we get to connect with them. So you can go to the next slide. Just a little bit more patting on the back. These are some more updated stats. And we really love to highlight that we're hitting that younger audience. Well, we don't get a lot of information about people who are a little bit younger than that, but we've got some homeschool students in the chat there. We see that 5th grade class. We know that these videos through PBS Learning Media and other outlets like that are really aiding teachers and educators in a whole lot of different environments, and making lessons more and more relevant, and letting people who, letting young people who watch a lot of YouTube and digital video already, we're letting them have really relevant and comfortable educational content. I've got one more slide here to just take you through kind of the big reach of digital studios. It's not all just about science shows. It's not all just about nature. We have shows that focus on art, linguistics, general science. We have prehistory and paleontology, astrophysics, cultural shows, you name it. We have a program out there from liberal arts to the hard sciences, and we're really proud of what we've been able to do. And you can find out more about the network there at that URL on the screen, and learn more about other shows. But the one we're talking about today is Overview, our favorite one. Overview began about 6 months ago. We launched our first episode with the mission being that we wanted to tell amazing stories about science and nature, but we wanted people to, in this fast-paced, like algorithm-driven social media, just rapid fire kind of online video world, to lean back and take a broader view, a zoomed out view. We're not vlogging, we're going to be flying with drones here, because we think we can tell amazing stories by taking that wider look, looking at the interconnectedness of systems and ecosystems, and how earth science and living systems overlap. We have programs ranging on Overview from environmental subjects to invasive species, to the one that we're going to be talking about today, which I think paints such an amazing picture of how an ecosystem and a species can have such a strong interplay throughout the history of the United States, the challenges that we face environmentally and with human-wildlife interactions, and what people are doing to try to both restore and take this to the next generation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael to tell you a little bit about how we made this episode, what our mission and motivation was, and all the problems that he had to deal with in the field while I was sitting back in a comfortable chair waiting to record my dialogue.
Great, thanks for handing it off, Joe. Yeah, so I've been flying drones for years, but this series is really interesting for me because it's our goal with each episode is that up to like 80 to 90% of the footage in there is original drone footage. So it's a unique and very interesting challenge. And one of the things that I think has been really interesting for me is to think about just even how you conceive of these stories, because it's so different. Like you could have a really fascinating story about ants or whatever, but is that something you can actually tell through a drone? And so like you have to really think about these stories in a different way, because there are certain stories that are really fascinating stories, but they just don't fit for Overview. So it's always trying to think about like, what is something where we can get a big picture view of this, and where seeing it from that perspective of the air from 100 or 400 feet up, where that actually provides some kind of new and revealing information that you just don't get from the on the ground perspective. And I think we've been really lucky with that in terms of that. And I think that the bison episode really was one that worked really well because you got to see the way that the bison moved on the prairie. So just for those of you who haven't seen the full episode, what you were seeing in that first clip was they're rounding up the bison for basically their annual health checkups and to give them inoculations and different things. And so, being able to actually see them as they're being rounded up and how they move. And you could kind of see it a little bit in that clip, and there's some more in the video if you watch it. But they move like if you didn't know they were bison, you might almost think they were fish the way they moved. It was absolutely fascinating and completely surprising for me to be able to see that. And you can go to the next slide, Larissa. But my background in this, so like I said, I've been flying drones for a while, but I hadn't done anything just concentrated on drones, but my background is in science storytelling and also animals. I have a longstanding interest in animals and animal stories. So I've worked on a lot of different projects. here's one where I was actually out with a cougar biologist, and we got to actually hold and see these baby cougars that were out there in Washington State. So for me, it was it was really just a natural to do this bison story. You can go to the next slide, and so this, I mean, it was not only fascinating to do, but there's, with every one of these projects, there's some unique challenge, or usually challenges, that you're facing in trying to do this. And the bison project was no different. With this one, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this was the first time that the bison roundup had actually been filmed with drones. And so there were some questions about, like, how would the bison react to, to actually having drones around, and could we film them? And so with this, we really had to, we talked through it beforehand, but then also when we were there, we wanted to just kind of ease in and just kind of test and see what kind of reactions the bison would have. And we didn't want to, like, do anything that would spook them or start a stampede. And it was really interesting, like, and just kind of testing, you just kind of fly real slow, you just kind of see, is there any kind of reaction? And they were actually usually pretty curious, and and sometimes just kind of, like, look up and watch it, and, like, oh, well, that's a strange bird, okay. And and so then when they were doing the roundup, of course, the bison had other things on their mind, and so they weren't even paying attention to the drones at all, and so we were able to film that. And we were also up quite a ways, so I don't even think they probably wouldn't have even heard the drones over the noise of the trucks and the engines and everything like that. So so they were, it was not a problem, and it worked really well. But with all of these, there's all these challenges that you have to figure out. And I kind of think of myself. You can go to the next slide. I kind of think of myself, and I think myself, Joe, the other producers on this, I think we all think of ourselves as kind of professional problem solvers, essentially. And each one of these projects is essentially like a big Rubik's Cube, except instead of it being a static puzzle, like, the pieces are always constantly moving and changing, and sometimes the pieces are pushing back on you, and you're always kind of having to adapt. You try and do as much planning as you can beforehand, and as much scouting and figuring out of the story and the logistics and the plan and how it's going to go. But I can tell you on one hand how many stories and projects have actually turned out the way I envision. Is actually this number, which is a big 0. They're always different in some way. Sometimes it's small deviations, sometimes it's large, but it really is a lot of just kind of problem solving and figuring things out. And so, this being Overview, being a drone-based series, it sounds like a lot of fun. What could possibly go wrong? Next slide. What could possibly go wrong? I can tell you, for this series, there have been myriad challenges that I have, that are unique to this particular project. I've crashed 3 drones, I think, on this project. Luckily, none of them were fatal crashes. We were able to keep going, but I've crashed multiple times on this project, and I expect I will do so many more times. And you can go to the next slide. There's also just the issue of being out there. There's always, drones are notoriously finicky. And so you might be out there, you might be flying, a quarter mile away, you might be a ways distance, you might be 300, 400 feet up, and all of a sudden your video feed cuts out. So I'm actually right now, I'm in Las Vegas, actually working on a project right now, and we're actually filming at the landfill outside of Las Vegas. On this shoot, the first day I was out there filming, there's a lot of heavy machinery out there at a landfill. There's a lot of metal, and it was causing, like, significant interference with the drone. And so I was up high over a landfill, and all of a sudden the video feed just cut out, and I couldn't see anything, and I wasn't even sure if I had control of the drone anymore. I had to okay, got it, and I had to bring it in and do that. And essentially, luckily there was nothing. It was not going to crash into anything that would cause any harm. We were in a landfill, but if it crashed into the landfill, it was essentially, it was a part of the landfill and we weren't getting it back. So every one of these things, there's always something that comes up, and it's always one of these things where your hands just start sweating and you're just kind of white knuckling it, like, oh gosh, okay, like, is this going to work? So it is definitely a lot of problem solving. Another thing that comes up with it, you can go to the next slide. Another thing that comes up with it is it's a real challenge to figure out where you can fly and where you can tell these stories from. So I mean, right off the bat, we know that national parks are completely off limits. So like if it's a story about a national park, basically we don't even, we can't even consider it because you just can't fly there. Wildlife refuges are another area you can't fly. So like there are certain places where we're just, we know we're never gonna be doing stories from that. But then another issue that comes up is we're also working under FAA regulations. And so if you go to the next slide, if you try and fly in a place like Los Angeles, here you can see like what it looks like to actually try and fly in Los Angeles with so many airports, and you see those colored circles and those rhomboids and other different shapes. That's all federal airspace. And so if you're going to try and fly in there, you have to get permissions, and you have to, figure out like what the regulations are for that particular space that you're flying. In Las Vegas, it's actually a really complicated airspace as well. And so I had to figure out there's multiple airports in Las Vegas. There's also an Air Force Base, Nellis Air Force Base, which is right here. And so it's a really complicated airspace to fly. So I had to go through and I had to, ask the FAA for a waiver to be able to fly at the landfill. I had to ask for waivers to be able to fly in certain places in the city. And, it's all just kind of a negotiation process, figuring out what's possible, where you can fly, where you can't fly, what the limitations are of those individual places. Another issue that comes up on these shoots, so you can go to the next slide, is it's actually related to something that's called Michael's Law, which was created by this filmmaker named Michael Werner. And the law essentially says that you could be in the quietest place on earth. You could be all alone in the middle of the desert. And as soon as you hit record on your camera, your recording device, whatever it is you're using, a busload of clowns will come in. The Blue Angels will fly overhead. A caravan of camels will walk through, and it's always noisy. There's always some kind of distraction that comes in. And so, like on one of these shoots, on one of these overview shoots, we were literally filming in the woods in Vermont. We were in a remote place in the woods. It was super quiet. And then I went to record the interview, set up, got everything set up for this interview. Everything was perfect. I set up, and I'm not even exaggerating, a minute after hitting record, within a minute, a chainsaw started up. And there was this buzz of this chainsaw, and we couldn't record the interview, and we couldn't get the person to stop either. So we had to literally pack everything up, tromp into the woods, and go look for a new location where you couldn't hear the chainsaw, where it looked good and where everything worked. And so it was like an hour and a half adventure just to find another spot. So it eats up your day. But it happens on every shoot. Like it is really unbelievable. As soon as you record, something is going to come up, and it's usually audio. Probably my biggest nemesis, our biggest nemesis on this project, though, is next slide, is the weather. And on every single one of these projects, I've had at least one day and usually 2 days just wiped out because of weather. So if it's raining, like if it's a steady rain, like you're just not flying your drone. Not only are the electronics really sensitive in most of these drones, and it'll just, you'll basically lose your drone. But also if you're trying to fly in the rain, there's no real screens to stop the rain from hitting your lens. So if you're flying 30 miles an hour through a rainstorm, all you're going to see is just the rain on the lens, and you wouldn't actually see the image. So basically rain, almost every shoot that I've done has either been rained out or snowed out. When we came to It's happened so much and with such regularity that I've kind of thought that the weather gods are against me or that the rain gods were against me. And when we came to, I was pretty much confirmed because when we came to Oklahoma, next slide, there was an epic ice storm. It was like, I don't know, Katie or Larissa, you can probably like fill us in, but I think it was like once in a decade ice storm that came in and just wreaked havoc across Oklahoma. We didn't even have power or internet for like the first day and a half, and it was just a huge challenge. And then so naturally I decided I should mention for this Las Vegas shoot, I've actually had I haven't had rain, that knock on wood or couches or but I have had a new issue with this one, which was wind. So I've actually been winded out on this shoot. Yesterday there were 40-mile-an-hour winds and I couldn't fly at all. Not only 40-mile-an-hour winds, but we're all out in the desert, out in this really dusty area. So it was blowing up this epic dust storm and you couldn't see anything out there. So that's a new one. I've been winded out on this shoot. But the last one that I want to mention is, so naturally because of all these issues with weather and ice storms and windstorms or wind problems, I naturally decided that it would be a good idea to do a project about, next slide. I naturally decided it would be a great idea to do a project in the mountains of Utah about avalanches and actually try to film and capture avalanches out there, which presented a whole unique set of challenges of trying to fly at 10,000 feet in really thin air, in really cold weather. We're talking about like single digits in terms of cold, with snow, high winds, and flying, in some cases, like flying, 3/4 of a mile distant, when your battery is draining really, really fast because it's so cold, and top of all these other things, and then trying to film your subjects and actually trying to capture these avalanches as they happen was a really unique challenge for me on this project. And thankfully, it worked out, and we're going to actually just show you just a short little clip from this episode. This is actually it's a sneak peek. The episode hasn't come out. It'll come out a week from Thursday, and so you'll be able to see it next week if you want to tune into PBS Terra. But here's just a little sneak peek of it.
Sometimes the slopes need a good strong shove to start an avalanche.
Fire!
And the best method they've found is to use explosives.
Explosives produce a tremendous shock wave that is able to penetrate the snowpack and make a weak layer fail. When that weak layer fails, an avalanche happens. Our goal is to create lots and lots of small avalanches so we don't have these big avalanches.
So thank you so much. And Katie, we'll throw it back to you for questions and answers, unless Joe, there's anything else you wanted to add on those?
Just that everything's better with explosions except for bison Roundup. That would be a very bad mix.
That would be a terrible mix, something we don't ever want to see. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe. That was entertaining and insightful to kind of get a behind the scenes look at what all goes on these aerial films, a reality. So we are going to move into our Q&A session. Right quick before we do so, I would like to give just a little bit of information about how the Nature Conservancy utilizes drones, who, what, when, where, how, and why. We are very selective about it. So the Nature Conservancy, the properties that we own, they are private land. We are a private land owner. So our lands are not necessarily categorized in some of those no-fly zones, such as the national parks or other places. But that doesn't mean that you can fly on them because they're private land. So there is no recreational drone drone flying over our properties anywhere. But the way that we're able to make that work is we do work with professional filmmakers and photographers to tell our story. And so whenever we have an opportunity like that to work with individuals and organizations such as Michael and Joe and PBS, we go through a thorough process. There is a lot of contractual paperwork that has to occur beforehand. We outline parameters about where they can and cannot fly. And one of the reasons for that is because on a lot of our properties, there are sensitive wildlife who respond negatively to anything flying over them. So for example, prairie chickens. Prairie chickens are deathly afraid of anything taller than they are or anything above them. Their number one predator are birds of prey, hawks, eagles, things like that. So if they see a drone flying over them, they are going to have a panic attack. And we don't want to do that to the adorable little prairie chickens. So we're very selective about utilizing drones on our properties. Obviously, to prevent any disturbance to sensitive wildlife, but again, B, selective because ultimately investing the time and energy that we have as a nonprofit only on projects that are going to tell our story. We don't have the capacity to partner with a film about aliens that wants to capture drone footage or whatever. We just don't have that capacity. So that's why we are selective. All right, so I hope that's helpful for folks in knowing about how the Nature Conservancy works with projects utilizing drones. All right, so what we are going to do now is we're going to roll on into that Q&A session, and we've got several already popping up in the Q&A box. Please take a moment to find that. If you have a question, enter it there. Also take a moment, even if you don't have a question, open it up and start liking the questions you want to see answered. I am going to start off with one question right here for Michael and Joe, and it seems like some of these have already been answered. So
I thought we actually, I saw several questions coming in about the relationship of the drones and sort of how close and how that operation goes when we're filming wildlife. And this might cover a few questions that are in the Q&A there. Michael, we can kind of trade off how we approach this. An issue we should say from the outset, like, you know, Michael's a licensed pilot and you know, operates under full regulations. You know, not the recreational drone flying that you can do out in the park with no training or calling of the authorities. All the problems we hear about in the media, right? And we are extremely sensitive and prepared and always engage with the local representatives, the authorities, the people behind the stories are after, to make sure that nothing that we do for a story is going to put the wildlife at danger, is going to be at any risk to the ecosystem in which we're working or the environment in which we're working, because we will be the first people to call out on Twitter when we see somebody, you know, spooking an animal to get a cool running shot with their drone, and you know that gets thousands and thousands of shares online. You know, nothing frustrates us more, because it sets back this the use of this amazing storytelling tool by people who don't take the considerations. So all of that is our discussions beforehand and lots of training and experience and a very specific case-by-case study to make sure that the way that we plan on filming these is appropriate for the environment and any of the species that we're going to be interacting with.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that's exactly right. And I think, like, the other thing I would just add is, like, in some cases, like, a lot of it happens, like, a lot of the conversation happens on the front end, and we will just rule out certain stories just because we know, like, there's no way to responsibly do it. Like, you're going to stress an animal, or you're going to, you know, you're going to cause some kind of disturbance, and we'll just go like, no, we're not even going to, you know, we shouldn't even consider that. And so, like, it limits, you know, we limit ourselves on those stories, and we won't even think about it if there is a chance that we're going to, you know, cause some kind of disturbance, you know, really stress an animal, we're going to do something that's, you know, deleterious to the wildlife or environment or whatever. So we just, you know, won't even consider it.
thank you both for clarifying. That was very helpful. So just to kind of further explain that, Michael, what's the distance when you were recording the bison in the Roundup, that footage that we saw at the very beginning? How high up was your bison? How high up was your drone over the bison?
It's, you know, it's deceiving because it's actually further away than it looks in some cases. Like, the lens on it actually punches in more. So, like, in some cases where it actually looks close, it's actually much further away. You know, probably, I I don't know the closest we got, but we never got super close to them. Like it might look like it was close, but it's punched in from the lens, or it might be a little bit digitally zoomed to get us in a little bit closer in some of those shots. So we were never super close to them.
All right, super, thank you. All right, our first question from the Q&A section here is from Dale. How did you get connected with Tallgrass for the Bison Project? And I remember this day. So Michael?
That's a great question. I have a friend and someone I went to graduate school with who actually works for the Nature Conservancy. She, I was talking to her about, potential projects, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, I know she works for the Nature Conservancy. What, projects are out there? And she mentioned, one of the things she mentioned was, she's like, you should check out the bison, and let me connect you with Katie Hawk at the Nature Conservancy. And I was like, yes, like, okay. And that started a conversation then. And we had multiple back and forth emails. We did, at least one or a couple phone calls beforehand. We went through multiple phone calls to kind of like just talk about the potential of the project, talk about what happens. Katie and I talked to Bob Hamilton, is also featured in that. We did a phone conversation as well. So there was a lot of different conversations beforehand, and I don't know, it started, I want to say it started months in advance. Katie, I don't know, maybe you have a better recollection of it.
Yeah, it did. I would say we began conversations about 3 months in advance, and then started planning all the logistics and whatnot. And since it was the year of COVID, we did also have to take a number of restrictions into account, and planning around those as well to ensure the safety of staff and our guest, Michael and his wife, Katie. So yeah, and then the ice storm hit. So that was, we welcomed him and Katie from New York, and we're so glad to have them. And the ice storm hit, and they were geared up, had all their camera equipment ready. The drones were ready for day one of Bison Roundup. And for the first time ever, we had to delay Bison Roundup for 2 days. Yes, I believe 2 or 3 days. And so we've never had to do that before, but we had absolutely no power out on the prairie, and we had no internet, nothing. So they need power to operate the equipment on the Bison Roundup through the chutes. And so they were busy getting generators ready, and we did start the first day with no power. So the first day of Roundup, we operated on generator power alone, and we're very grateful for the cellular reception gods for allowing us to be able to have some connectivity while we were out there working alongside Michael and Katie. So all right, we'll move on to our next question that has the most votes. Any thoughts to do a project featuring prescribed fire?
That's an element we didn't see in the clip that we showed, but there is a portion mentioned about not only the bison, that ancient keystone species, so important to maintaining the tallgrass prairie ecosystem, but prescribed burns are definitely part of that. We touch on that in that story. But there's actually another episode of Overview where it was in either in Oregon or Eastern Oregon,
Montana, I think.
It was in Montana, so Western Montana, where we visited a fire lookout tower to talk about the kind of urban and wildlife interface, and the new pressures of fire in more arboreal forest environments, and the people who are out there acting as lookouts, and how the evolution of prescribed burn has worked in forest environments to keep them. I mean, living under flammable trees is never going to be completely free from risk, but sort of the evolving nature and role of people who are searching for fire in environments like that. So we've touched on it in a couple of different stories.
It's also, it's also one of those things that has its own unique challenges, in the sense that those prescribed burns are very, very weather dependent. So if the winds are wrong, they won't do it, and so it can be really, really tricky to schedule. And it's basically like, you might think like, okay, it's going to happen this week and we're going to be there, this day, and then it won't happen, and they might not go for a week. And so it's one of those things where I know I've thought of other like prescribed burn stories, and I know other producers have talked about them, and but it's also really logistically challenging to figure out how to do that.
Very true. And it's so logistically challenging that we weren't able, obviously, to get prescribed fire footage from Michael during his visit in Oklahoma. And it took us a while to be able to coordinate gathering that footage for that episode. What worked out really nicely, though, because it just wasn't necessarily efficient for Michael to come back to Oklahoma with the hopes of getting to get a prescribed fire to gain drone footage of. We were able to work with one of our local photographers and videographers that volunteers his time for the Nature Conservancy, which is Ryan West. And we were really grateful. He also is a licensed drone videographer, and we were able to work with him to get out there and get that footage so that Michael and Joe could get that included in that episode. So just a big thank you to Ryan for working with us on that. And so that also required coordination between Michael and Ryan, talking about specifications and their needs, specific angles, specific shots. And so that was a great opportunity for Ryan to get to learn that. But, there's a lot of planning and logistics that goes into all of this. It's wish it could just be as easy as taking a drone out and just launching it into the air. But a lot of planning goes in advance to this. So thank you guys for explaining that. We're going to move on to our next question. Let's see, Carol. Carol is asking, how many drones did you use to film the Roundup, Michael?
That was a great question. I have, let's see, I think I have 6 or 7 different drones, and they're all different. I ended up, so I have, very big drones, and then I have very small drones, and I have ones that do specialty things. For this one, like I pictured I would actually be using the big drone a lot for this, but the nature of the Roundup is that things like you don't quite know exactly when the Roundup is going to start. It'll just kind of go like, okay, like we're going to go, and it might happen in a matter of minutes. And so you got to be up and you got to fly really fast, and you got to be, just able to respond really quickly. And so the bigger drone that I have takes a while to set up. It's slower. And so with this project, I found like one of the smaller drones is called a DJI Mavic 2 Pro, and that one is very fast to set up. It's very nimble and flies really well. And I was able to launch that really quick, and so I was able to be more flexible with that, and to actually be able to respond to this kind of, unpredictable situation. And I found actually, like, I envisioned that I would be using, I have an Aspire 2 that I use, and I was envisioning I would probably use that on like 80 to 90% of, 80 to 90% of the shots would be the Inspire 2. And I found actually it's probably more like, 75 to 80% is filmed with the Mavic 2, just because of how quick and nimble it is, and how so many times you're having to respond to a situation, and you're having to, like having to launch really quick, have to get up there. Or in cases like when you're filming like avalanches in the mountains at 10,000 feet, there's no good place to launch a big drone from. You're right on a steep ridge line with lots of snow. And so you can't just set this big drone with a big footprint down and then launch it. And then how do you land it? So but with some of the smaller drones, I can actually hand launch it, and I can hand land it as well. I can land it right in my hand. And so in some of these extreme environments where it's really challenging just to find a place to launch from, it's much easier with a smaller drone. And so I found that one gets used a lot more than I ever expected on these shoots, but it's just because of the nature of the project and the shoots themselves, and being able to having to be really nimble, but also having to film in really tricky locations.
All right, fantastic. I had the pleasure of getting to watch you launch your drones from your hand. So that was really cool to watch. It was kind of like watching someone set a bird free almost. All right, so our next question comes from Katie. She's curious, hey, Michael, what was your biggest nemesis for filming at Tallgrass Prairie Preserve?
The biggest nemesis. We did have, the rain, the ice storm was obviously a big nemesis. The winds also at the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, they're pretty strong out there. So we got some really good gusts, and during one of the roundups, it was one of the times when they were going up and doing this roundup, it was really blowing, and I could see like the drone was like canted. Even though the camera was, the camera will stabilize itself, so it levels off. But the drone itself was having to was tipped because of the wind. It had to fight against it just to hold position. So I would say wind was a big nemesis on it. Not as bad as Las Vegas as I'm experiencing here, where I'm literally, it's so strong I'm grounded, but it was definitely a challenge.
Good old Oklahoma wind. All right. So it looks like our next Nick, and he is curious, how much drone footage do you normally record versus how much you end up using in your final episode?
To give you an idea of how many days you're ever in a spot and an episode ends up being 7 minutes long, be some sort of a ratio there.
Yeah, I mean, you end up filming, you end up filming a lot more than you need. And part of it is just a function of how the drones work. I find, like with a cinema camera, it's easy to remember. You hit record and you capture the scene and okay, I'm gonna set up for this shot, I'm gonna hit record. With the drones, I find it's sometimes really easy. Like you're so fixated, you're so focused on the flying and the framing and all of these other challenges that you have when you're doing a drone, that it can be really easy to forget to hit record. And that is deadly. And it has happened on these shoots where I'm like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. What an incredible shot. I can't believe we just got that. And then afterwards I'll look and I'll realize, oh no, I forgot to hit record. And so the default now most times is to actually, once it's up in the air and we're just, at height, just hit record, and I'm just going to record long. It burns through the SD cards, of course, and burns through the memory, but at least I know I'm not going to miss the shot. So we end up filming, for these projects, we end up filming a lot of stuff that will just never make the cut. So we have hours of drone footage that will just never make it.
And I see another question coming in about this. We'll get to it more later, but we do go in with a plan too. When we're after certain shots and we know, oh, I think we got it on that one, or like we didn't get the pan quite right on that, and then you can sort of redo that kind of thing. But we can talk about that more in a few questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and roll into that, Joe. That was actually the next question I was going to bring up, so it's very, very related here. So the full question is, could you talk a bit about how you go from developing a story concept to actually setting up the drone shot list and to help tell the story?
Sure. So we touched on it a bit that there's so many science questions we could choose to answer, but the first filter is finding something that's appropriate to tell from this perspective. Where is this point of view bringing true value to the story? We couldn't tell this in any other way. We're the people to do this, and this is the right way to do it. So we have Michael can tell you on our Slack channels, it's like dozens of ideas that come through, or just like, I don't think we quite have this isn't right for that point of view. So you do some extensive background work just to make sure the perspective works. And then, we try to find that core STEM idea inside, that a teachable moment in there that with the beautiful scenery and the wonderful characters and places that we're going to be, we're still we want people to understand, here the value of a keystone species, or some particular element that's going to be educational in there. And we want to have great characters that are going to help us tell the story. They're on the ground. We're seeing them maybe from a little bit far away, but they're really unique and interesting to hear their perspective and their motivations and why they do what they do. And of course, a great subject. It's pretty. Seeing the expanse of something like Tallgrass Prairie, and then trying to imagine, that drone just gives you that great horizon to horizon kind of perspective, and then trying to imagine what that would have been like 2,000 years ago, as an expanse across North America, as far as you could see, this ocean of waving green with big brown furry whales popping up every once in a while. It's an inspiring, and kind of takes you to these wonderful imaginary places of how it once was and how it could be. And we just knew from that historical and future looking perspective, and being able to tell that both an environmental and an ecosystem story, that this was a great one. So from then on, we'll sort of begin with a kind of traditional script. And you never see me on camera, so we sort of approach it maybe how you would an audio or radio script where the voice and the dialogue is doing a lot of work. I can't make expressions and move my hands or point at anything. To let the pictures and the voice really work together. And a lot of that prep work is done before we go out. And then we'll have kind of a shooting script that Michael and the producers will work off of. And then we hand it to them, and I'll hand it to Michael to tell how that gets translated in the field.
Yeah, so I mean, the shooting script is great because then you can see exactly what kind of shots and what kind of scenes you need, and you can. So it's really critical because otherwise, with the drones, you have limited batteries. It takes longer to do. So you really have to go in with a plan, in some cases I know, there are filmmakers who, go into a situation, they're just going to film verite, and they're like, okay, I'm just going to, I'm going to be in a person's life and I'm just going to film, and just, catch as catch can and whatever happens and capture the moment. And with drones, because you might have 20 minutes, you might have 25 minutes in the air, so you have to know what's happening when and where, and what you can potentially capture and how that fits in the story. So you really have to have a really tight plan. So that shooting script is great. It's your roadmap. And then off of that, you use that roadmap and then you figure out, okay, so what kind of shots, what kind of shots work here? And so, the shooting script has the visual notes in it, but then you translate that into a shot list. And okay, I want to do this follow shot of the bison, as they're moving this way or doing this kind of thing. And so those are the two things, that shooting script and then the shot list, are really critical to making sure that the projects work and we get what we want.
All right, very helpful. Thank you, guys. We do have time for just a couple more questions, and I'm going to hone in on two that are from the students that are watching. So we have the Muskogee 5th grade class, and then we've got some homeschoolers as well with Carrie. And the homeschoolers with Carrie have a question. Do you all have any temptation to do a Twister style project and use any devices in a tornado?
I've got a ton of temptation to do it. Do we have the insurance that would let us do it? If we ever find a drone that we just don't want anymore, and we can has a flyable range, so the radio transmitter will let us stay a safe distance away to the tornado, I will happily sacrifice that thing for the sake of getting the coolest piece of footage ever. But that's a very expensive shot.
Yeah, that would be a fun one, let alone trying to actually chase the tornado, right? So yeah, that would be an expensive shot for sure. Thank you all for that question. All right, now I'm going to move along to Nalita and her 5th grade class in Muskogee. They want to know, and you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you have anything you want to add to expand upon it, Michael or Joe, please do. Are the bison affected or frightened by the drones? Are they even aware that they are there? If you could just kind of talk about that a little more again.
Sometimes they were not aware at all, or they didn't seem to be aware of it, and then other times you'll see I can't remember exactly what minute in the piece it is, but you can see there's one bison, I just kind of orbit around him as it's eating grass, and it's just kind of and it's just sitting there, you can see it just chewing, and it's just kind of just watching the drone, and it kind of anthropomorphizing here, but it seemed kind of amused or just kind of curious, what's that? And so and most of the time that was the reaction, that it was just kind of they kind of look at it and be like, that is a really strange bird, what is that thing, and trying to kind of figure it out. But they didn't seem spooked or scared, and during the roundup, of course, and these other times, they just they weren't even paying attention at all. And so a lot of times we were, so far away, I don't think they probably even heard it.
All right, thank you so much. I am going to ask you one more question from Stephanie, because I got to experience this with you, Michael. Hearing from you after your visit was really special and meaningful for us. We always love sharing the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve with visitors and whomever. But Stephanie is asking, what was your favorite part about working on the drone footage of the bison?
Favorite part, I think, there's so many things about the shoot that I just loved. I think just being at the prairie itself was just magical. I grew up in the Midwest, and so I'm familiar with kind of these landscapes, but I've never really spent concentrated time, in a tall grass prairie. And there's something about it that I mean, it has that same kind of allure and fascination and draw that like going to the ocean does. You have these big sweeping views, and just, it just kind of evokes this sense of awe and wonder. And then when you learn like what a rich environment this is, which I think a lot of people think like, oh, it's grass, it's really simple, but like it's amazingly complex and diverse. I mean, I think just that experience of just, like experiencing it firsthand, and then knowing and learning about just how rich and diverse it was. I mean, it was just a really magical experience.
All right, super. Well, you guys, we are going to wrap up our Q&A session with that. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe. To all of our attendees, please take a few notes. We will send out a follow-up email that will have a link to the recording. So for those that didn't get to watch it, you can share it with them. We will also include a link to the overview series in that email as well. But right quick, before we depart, I do have a couple of notes to share with you. If you want to go and find the overview series on your own, you can hop online and go to pbs.org/show/overview. There you'll find not only the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve Bison Roundup video, but you will also find a variety of other episodes that they've included in here. So thank you so much, and hope you all get to enjoy that. One other little note, housekeeping: if you'd like to learn more about the work that TNC does with bison, especially you students, I highly recommend you visit nature.org/okbison. There we have all kinds of facts and stories and videos. You can learn more about how bison play an important role in conserving the tallgrass prairie ecosystem. And our last housekeeping note of the day is we have a really big day ahead of us tomorrow. I hope you can join us to celebrate. It will be a virtual type experience, but tomorrow we are celebrating Oklahoma's public lands at our state capitol. We've been working on a resolution with the Senate and with the House, with our legislators at the Capitol, to have an opportunity for them to express their support, as well as the public to be able to express their support and love of our public lands. They provide a number of benefits and value to our state, to our economy, and to our residents, opportunities for activities, as well as just peace and solace out in the great outdoors. So tomorrow we will be doing a Facebook Live on our Facebook page, facebook.com/nature.ok, sometime between 11 and 12, whenever the House and the Senate get out of session. We will be interviewing some legislators tomorrow and hope that you can join us. But it is a big day, and hope that you can come and celebrate all of our state parks, our federal lands, where we get to go to the wildlife refuges and the parks and the trails and the hiking and everything that's involved in these wonderful places, that also provide an immense amount of habitat, food, and shelter for the wildlife. So join us tomorrow and celebrate Oklahoma's public lands. With that, we will conclude this Nature Connects Us webinar and hope that you will join us for our next one in April. We will be having one on April 21st. More details to come, but I can tell you it involves a virtual hike to celebrate Earth Day. Thank you, everyone, and hope that you have a wonderful day. Have a good one. Bye-bye.